Hey, Katie.
Hey.
We are back and talking about a new topic today.
Yeah.
It
Minus
turns out
one.
-1. Yes, we missed that Mike can't be here.
Yeah. But I
But
think it's going to be good because I think I'm excited to have this conversation.
I'm not sure if excited would be the word for me. It's the topic, it hits close to home for both of us in different ways. But we do have a lot in common. We both work for the CLC, which is why we do these awesome videos.
Yeah.
We both graduated or got our PhDs from the same institution. We both love Harry Potter and can make like
Absolutely.
obscure references, and no one else in the room gets it.
I don't appreciate being called Hermione, but continue.
I hope that was off camera. And another thing we have is that both of us were surprised with having to make a decision of whether or not to have an abortion based on the what we found out about our children before they were born.
Yeah.
So,
And I don't think there's anything that can prepare you for that. And I think a lot in our churches, have struggled with this, and
yeah.
it's hard.
Yeah, abortion in general is a very difficult topic to talk about. As with I think we'll start with every video by saying James 1:27, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger.
Yeah.
And I would also add to that 1 Peter 3:15, which says, always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that's in you with gentleness and respect. That most of the time when people talk about abortion on one side or the other, there's very little gentleness and very little respect. And I think from the Christian standpoint, when we're not being gentle and respectful, we're also not conveying the hope.
Exactly.
That there is a hope for those who choose life. And I think that's going to probably be the big theme of what we have to talk about today.
I completely agree.
So first question, we're going to go through these and back and forth, is what was your situation where a doctor told you you might want to consider having an abortion?
Yeah, so my story really began more in college because my husband and I, or boyfriend at the time, were talking one day and ran across, I think, the scenario that a lot of college students hear is, this mom was diagnosed with cancer while she was pregnant. What does she do? And kind of back and forth, and everybody talking about what would you do in that kind of a situation. And I remember very vividly in college really appreciating the struggle that a decision like that would have to mean for a mom, and somebody who looks at my life or the potential life that's growing within me, and where to make those priorities and those calls. And I remember as I struggled through that, really feeling led by the Holy Spirit to just say, lean into life and really trust the giver and taker of life in all of those situations. And so in college, it felt very abstract, and I don't think anyone actually thinks I'm going to be in a position like this, but I was like, if this was ever me, I think this is what I would choose. So fast forward a couple of years, a marriage later, and our first pregnancy, and we had a very normal kind of first trimester, and everything seemed to be going well. And we went for a follow-up check-in at about 25 weeks. And it was just an entirely different experience. And, the room was dark. There was just a lot of quietness. And that's always really unnerving when they're quiet in the ultrasound room. I don't like that feeling at all.
Yeah.
And came down to, there was some pretty severe things that they were seeing in the ultrasound, and they weren't sure what caused it. They weren't sure what that would mean for our baby if they were to survive. And so the doctor took us back to her actual private office room and started explaining everything. And she said, we really need to be considering the fact that we have two patients here. We have a mom and we have a daughter, and we don't want to make any choices that might hurt Katie right now, because we really need to focus on what Katie needs and all these things.
Making the decision for you.
Yeah, like really kind of walking through that. And I mean, my mind is still spinning through what she just told us that she saw with our baby that was just really rocking my world. But as she's talking, all of a sudden I realize, oh, like, you're actually saying we need to think about if we need to just kind of hit the reset button here to make sure that my life's okay, because there's so many unknowns during this time. And I was so thankful that in that moment where it just feels like the air is taken out of the room and everything is just turned upside down, the Lord had kind of gone before me. And it was like that moment in college just flashed right back before me. And I was suddenly like, oh, no, I know my answer. Like, we're going to continue. And I think the first thing I remember looking up at her and saying, I want to save my daughter. And it wasn't an easy choice, and there were so many highs and lows that went into that process. But they thought that I had a condition that if I started to hemorrhage at the delivery, they were really worried that I was going to not be able to survive a delivery. That was the big concern, is that they thought I had some type of a condition that they wouldn't be able to stop it if I had started to hemorrhage during the delivery process. And then they were also really worried about the survivability of my daughter, who had pretty severe physical disabilities and just deformities and things that they were seeing. They're like, well, if this is what we can see on the external, just imagine what could be on the internal, and we can't see those things.
Oh, the unknown, right?
The unknown was just really hard to live with for the last I was on bed rest for the entire third trimester. I was hospitalized a couple of times. And our story had, thankfully, a happier ending, though, that she came out. And I jokingly say it was the most anticlimactic birth ever because I had a whole team of medical experts. She had a whole team of medical experts, and they were so geared and ready to go when it was finally time for her to deliver. And then she came out, and it was the most beautiful wah, wah, wah moment ever, because they rushed her off. They started doing all these exams. Her APGAR was fine. She had all of these obvious physical difficulties and physical just issues that we're going to work through later. But internally, it was okay. She was breathing. Everything was good. And one of the most beautiful moments of silence I've ever had, about 30 minutes after she was born, it was just me, my husband, and our daughter. We were just, no doctors, they just left. And I remember that being probably one of the happiest moments of my life, because while we still knew we had a lifetime ahead of us of being parents of a special needs child, being parents to a child that was going to have an insurmountable amount of difficulties, having such physical differences, and knowing that bullies were going to come in her life, knowing that there were going to be surgeries and a lot of things ahead of her. But in that moment, there was peace, that the Lord said, I am the giver and taker of life, and I've given you life today. And that was what we were thankful for in that moment, was that He had sustained us through what felt like an insurmountable storm.
Yeah. That's so cool. I think we're going to hear a little more details than we know before about ours, and I could just picture the doctors kind of like, oh, well, I'm not going to get a good paycheck today. Yeah, it was. There's no major catastrophe here for me to work on. It was really
kind of funny, and the nurses were just kind of almost giddy for us, and they just intentionally stayed away, and they wouldn't let the family in. They're like, nope, y'all can't come in. So
that is so cool. I can definitely relate to the wind knocked out of you experience. You know, for my wife and I, when she became pregnant with our first daughter, it felt like everything was kind of lining up. Like we had just moved into a new house, which had an extra bedroom. We were ready. She got pregnant really early in our actual attempts. And we know for some people, sometimes it takes several months or a year or, even longer, or they end up even adopting. You never know what's going to happen. But there we were with a positive pregnancy test, and everything just seemed to be lining up really well. And we went in for our first sonogram. Is that right? Ultrasound?
Sonogram ultrasound. Yeah.
Is it the same thing?
I think so. Okay. I think it's a different technology, same result.
Okay, well, we went in for that, and we see this living child moving around and squirming and kicking, and we're all excited, and I didn't know that silence was a bad thing, but the nurse wasn't saying anything, and then the nurse was like, I'm going to go talk to the doctor, and then the doctor came in and pointed out that her hands weren't opening, that our daughter had a hole in her heart, that her lungs weren't forming well, that she had spots in her brain. And they said all of these things point to signs that your daughter has trisomy 18, which is a chromosomal disorder. And just like you, we were, presented with the option of abortion. And so we were at this high, and then, almost like you're going up these steps, and then you just expect the next step to be there, and it's not. And it feels like you just fell all the way back down to the bottom. And so he left us in the room by ourselves to talk, and it was a very sad, very somber time. And although we felt God's presence, it wasn't like it made it happy. But, Amanda looked at me and was like, what are we going to do? And similar to you, it was just God's strength and God's resolve, and even God giving us the words. And I wasn't speaking for her. I knew that we have the same faith and the same foundation, but I just, God gave me the leadership in that moment to say, we are going to choose to honor life and to carry this child, whatever the projections are for statistics of how long they'll survive or what their quality of life will be. we're going to carry this child, for God for as long as he allows us to, and we're going to give this child their best chance at survival in this life before going on to the next one.
Mm-hmm.
So, question number 2 is, how did you see God at work after choosing life?
So I got a really kind letter in the couple of weeks afterwards as word started to circulate that something had happened.
Mm-hmm.
And a really sweet saint of the Lord sent me a letter. It didn't say a lot of things, but I just remember one very profound statement she put in the note to me. I was kind of praying for you, but she said, I'm praying for you to discover the Lord's strength and the journey ahead of you. And there really, that resonated with me because I had so many people at the time saying, you're so strong. I can't believe you're so strong. Like, this is so amazing what you're doing.
They just want to hold you up on a pedestal.
And
right?
like nothing about me felt strong in that moment.
Right, exactly.
I felt literally, and quite literally, because of the hemorrhaging issues that they were worried I had a blood issue and a blood disorder that they weren't sure how that was going to impact the pregnancy. Wow. I felt on the verge of death, but I also felt on the verge of spiritual death. I felt on the verge of emotional death. And I remember our family really used Psalm 91 as kind of our covering, and just really started to take that vision of the Lord covering you with his pinions. And as she prayed that I would discover the strength of the Lord in that journey, I really started to resonate with this idea that there's nothing about me that's being strong in this moment, because
right.
I'm very aware of how fleshly weak I am in this particular moment.
Yeah.
I'm very, very weak. And I know that you guys understand that, because there's nothing like grieving for your child. Like, there's just, it hits you in a part of your soul that's different than anything else you've experienced.
Right. And it's not just a grief of loss, it's a grief of finding out what their life might be like.
Right.
It's any sort of grief that happens when you realize their life is going to be impacted in a profound and on the surface level, negative way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so what I really started to visualize from the Lord, that the kind of the visualization that he gave me in that time, was me as a soldier on a battlefield, which sounds kind of silly, but really what I saw myself was a soldier on the battlefield who had been wounded. And I was one blow away from that death, that there was just one more strike, one more arrow, one more thing to hit me, and I knew it was going to be the end of me. But at the same time, as I sat there kind of on that battlefield, I just kept looking around and realizing the final blow's not coming, that it kept missing me. And what I really started to recognize was it was the Lord himself was the one covering me and holding that shield to say, that final blow's not going to come, because I'm going to be your cover right now. And that was what I really started to recognize. And he taught me that to prepare me for other life lessons that were going to come along. But what I really started to realize in that time was that the protection of the Lord, the hope of the Lord, is so much more powerful than anything I'd experienced up to that point. That while I lay there literally, spiritually on the verge of what I felt like was death, death never came because of his protection over me.
Right. Yeah.
Well, what about you?
Yeah, I relate to both the strength and the weakness, like at the same time, just completely in tandem. Yeah. And I can speak of this very strong, powerful moment where I was like, we choose life, and then the scene ends, the cameras turn off. Why, God? And I remember thinking, knowing Scripture pretty well describes God as the God of order. And then my question I kept asking is, God, if you are a God of order, how can I have a daughter who has a chromosomal disorder? Like, isn't that completely against who you are? And yet I know it's something that many, many people face. Down syndrome is trisomy 21. It's another chromosomal disorder. And I think so those questions were there, and the doubt was there, and the frustration was there. And I think through all of it, his answer back to me was, yes, I am the God of order, but I'm also the God who can give you peace in the midst of chaos. And that's who I want to show myself to you to be right now, is the God of peace in the midst of chaos. And, it really is a peace that passes understanding. Yeah. There were times where, even though we know we had this child who, it was kind of like the statistics are, only one in so many make it past the first trimester. And then after that, only one in so many survive birth. And then only one in so many survive the first hour, day, month, year, and so on. And there are some very rare cases where a child lived to be like maybe 4 or 5 years before they passed, but they never, ever made it into adulthood. So we're faced with that. And then one day my wife just says to me, you know what, I don't know why, but today I just feel happy. Like I've got this child inside of me. Scientists might say like chemicals in her body or whatever, I don't know. But for us, you know, there was still just a joy and a privilege and an honor to get to carry a life that God had created, a life that was still a miracle, even in the midst of the chromosomal disorder, and that was still in God's image, we believe, still in God's image, regardless of how, you know, whatever deformities or whatever insufficiencies there may have been in her body. And it was just such a blessing to get to experience that in its own way. You know, they say that babies can hear like lower registry voice. We remember like going to sleep at night, and when she started squirming around more and we could feel the kicks, I'd put my hand on my wife's belly and we'd be going to bed. I'd be like, hello, Abby. She starts squirming around. And of course I had to do a Star Wars reference because I'm a dork dad. It's like, I'm your father. Squirm, squirm, kick, kick, kick. And my wife tells me that
she clearly is understanding me here. Like.
Yeah. My wife tells me she was at like a concert where people were singing Feliz Navidad, which by the way is my mom's. Like she hates that song so much.
That's hilarious.
And she said that our daughter was just going bananas to that song.
At the music.
Yeah, at the music. And so, you know, it was a very short time that we had her, but we still had these happy memories and we still had these moments of joy that God gave us because we had his peace and we know he was caring for us. So
what that really reminds me of, though, David, is the experience that I've lived having, you know, we didn't talk about my middle, but, you know, I have two daughters with special needs, and having two kids with pretty severe difficulties and being plugged in because of my children to a broader community of families who have experienced things ranging from, you know, having to bury children far too early to having to raise children that have severe difficulties. The one thing the Lord has also shown me time and time and time again is that life is a gift that is celebrated regardless of length, regardless of quality. I have actually never personally met a parent who chose life who ended up regretting it, because that life, however long, however short, whatever trials or difficulties, when you are able to lean in and say, this is still a beautiful life, I think that that's the gift of the Lord that he gives us when we talk about the image of God. You know, that's one of like my big things that I harp on pretty regularly. I
think you wrote a dissertation on it.
I may have, but I'm a pretty big fan of the image of God. But one of the things that's so important to me to tell people is that we have to recognize that the image of God isn't something that you have more of than I do, or that your daughter had more of than my daughter, or that my child with it, or less of, or anything like that, that it's something that's beautifully equal in each of us. Yeah. And when we can celebrate that, I think what that does is it brings something to the table that says every life has something to give to the kingdom of God, that every life has purpose, has intentionality, and has something that the Lord has deemed completely beautiful and lovable in. Right. And so whether that be a life that ends early or a life, you know, like my middle, who she may never say a word out loud, and she may never have anything that she can bring to the table and add to the discussion in that regard. Right. She still has something that she's bringing to the kingdom of God because God has given her his image and he has given her life. And I think that that is a really important part of the conversation that sometimes is hard for people to think about, because we think about people with disabilities, we think about people who have, you know, just a whole host of issues as kind of less human. Right. You know, I think that's a hard thing sometimes, is that, you know, you're not as human because you're missing these chromosomes, or you're missing this ability to do something. And the dehumanization, I think, really belittles what that image of God and the gift that life itself is, that the gift of life is also something that we receive. It's not just kind of this random idea, like the cerebral idea of the gift of life. I think it's an actual gift that our children have to give us, that all, you know, any time a human life comes in, that's a gift that we have to receive as much as it is just something we can say. It's not just a mantra, like it's an actual tangible thing. Yeah, I agree with that completely. For the next question, maybe I'll answer first so we can end more on a high note. Okay. But and it's like, as you chose life, how has God blessed you since because of that choice? And for us, that story isn't very long.
Our daughter was born 3 months premature with many difficulties, and we gave her best chance for survival. And when we realized that keeping her any longer would be selfish and cruel, then God gave us the peace and the readiness to let her go. But in that time, God still found ways to bless us. For instance, the doctor who we had, if you go into an emergency room, you don't get to choose your doctor. Yeah. The doctor who we had was a Christian. We were serving at a Chinese church in Fort Worth. She was a member of a Chinese church in Arlington that we had partnered with at different times. And so we were just immediately on the same wavelength, and she knew where we were coming from. And it just made every conversation she had with us so much easier because of that commonality of faith. And it was God just saying, like, I got you, fam. This is me. This is me taking care of you. And by the way, side note, when our second daughter, Naomi, was born, she was having trouble latching. She was losing weight. She had jaundice. We had to rush her to the emergency room. Different hospital, different NICU center. The same doctor walks in.
That gave me chills.
It's giving me chills right now, because I remember being in that hospital and just saying, God, I know you've got this, and this is really selfish of me, but I just want to pray that you would show me some sign that this one's going to be different. And in walks Dr. Chi, and I'm just like, what? And if we hadn't chosen to carry that first daughter, we wouldn't have had that moment of assurance with the second daughter. And another interesting thing, another interesting blessing, that it is a blessing, but it's also bittersweet, was about 6 months after our second daughter was born, my mom had a stroke and had some severe brain damage, and she was on life support. And suddenly our family was faced with having to make the same decision for her that we had to make with our first daughter, Abigail. And how weird is it that in that situation, I was able to give counsel to my dad because we'd been through a situation that he hadn't yet. And just like 2 Corinthians 1 says, you're able to comfort someone else with the comfort that God has comforted you with. Absolutely. And I would not have had that wisdom to share with him. And I'm not bragging on myself, had we not given God the opportunity for him to prove himself and how much he could bless us.
And if I may, I think it also even points to the gift that your daughter gave to your family, that was something that she could give to y'all. That again points to how beautiful that even in her short time with you guys as your family, she brought that so that she could bless you all too. I think that's really beautiful. Yeah,
huge blessing. And I never had to spank her.
Didn't have to do any of the hard things.
Yeah, she got to go directly to heaven card. She missed the entree, but she's enjoying the main course. Wow. She didn't watch the trailer, but she's seeing the full feature. I'm okay with that at this point. I mean, we'd love to have her, but I'm okay with that. Yeah. So how about for you, Eve? I'm a big fan. I'm sure many people are. She is so fun to follow. Tell us about the blessing it's been to have her.
Eve has really just, and I could say this for any of my kids. I think any parent watching would say how their kids have impacted them and changed them. Yeah. But what Eve has really shown me time and time again is that you can really make of things what you want it to be. And if you're willing to lean into the things that are hard, don't ignore the fact that they're hard. And to do so belittles the experience of the person going through it, and it also robs you of the blessing of seeing the Lord come through in miraculous ways. But what the Lord has shown us time and time again is that disability does not have to be a death sentence, that it's okay to struggle, that it's okay to be in need of the community because, spoiler, we all need that. Yeah. My needs are a little bit more obvious, and I've also had to learn how to be a little bit humble and recognizing that there's a reason they call it special needs, is that there's going to be some extra accommodations. We've had a lot of challenges. We've had surgeries. We've had emergency 911 calls. We've had to rush to the emergency room for different reasons and stuff. But what we've seen, I think, the bottom line over and over again is we've seen that the Lord's grace is sufficient, that he's faithful to be there in those moments if you're willing to just kind of lean into those difficult conversations. I think my personality in general tends to try to be on the more positive side of things, and so there's a temptation to just kind of pretend like everything's fine all the time. And I don't think that helps anybody. It doesn't help the person struggling to figure out, can I choose life or not? Like, can I even handle this? It seems too much. It really belittles the mom who has been given a diagnosis like I did with my kid, saying like, I don't know what's going to happen to your child. And you know, it really, it doesn't help anyone to paint a facade that everything's fine, but Christ is there. Christ is enough. His strength will be sufficient to carry you through the darkest times. And also the higher times too. What I've told people that I experienced even with our middle daughter, Felicity, who has cerebral palsy. She was born with severe brain damage, and that's another story to go into another day. But when she was born, the doctors told us that she might never go past a 6-month-old functionality because of the brain damage that they saw on her MRI at 48 hours old.
Wow.
And I remember in those moments reeling kind of on the post-diagnosis side of that, really just kind of searching for the Lord. And I got a note from a friend, or actually not even a friend, it was a lady that I hadn't even known. She just heard about our story. And she wrote me and said, hey, I just wanted to reach out and let you know that it's going to be hard. Like I'm not going to sugarcoat that there's not going to be hard times. But she said, but I think that you just really need to know right now that there's joy. That there's gonna be joy. And that's the big thing that our family's kind of leaned into. I think if you follow us on social media, you'll see we use the hashtag #ChooseJoy a lot. But her promise of joy to come really kind of gave me something to latch onto, hope. Right. That even in the midst of some of the harder things that we've had to go through as a parents with special needs kids, that there's still joy to be found there. And what I've told people before is that it's kind of like when you go through that level of grief, it kind of buries into your soul levels of grief that you didn't know existed. But what I wasn't anticipating is that the inverse was happening too, where the joy that we were able to experience on the flip side, it was almost like as it was going, like the grief was digging down into us. What I wasn't aware of is that the Holy Spirit was creating caverns up high to prepare us for joy on the other side. Right. So kind of my like silly example, but like very real example is everybody's excited when your child takes a first step, right? So my kid was born without a leg, you know that, but my daughter, part of her issues is she's a double amputee, and so she doesn't have an arm and a leg. So everybody's first step is joyous. There's no way for you to understand what Eve's first steps looked like, because it was the result of years of surgeries, therapies. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Like we were all just in tears. And so, you know, that's like a really tangible example, but having joy in those moments, it's sad when you have a child that has to have surgeries, that has to go through all those things. A basic thing that all of us want is for our kids to be able to walk and to run into our arms and stuff. And she didn't get that for the first several years of her life. And that's sad. And that's okay for that joy and sadness to coexist at the same time, because sorrow and joy are not mutually exclusive. Right. And that, I think, has been a real hallmark of our family, is saying it's okay for these two things to coexist, because happiness is dependent on our circumstances. You know that. Joy is dependent on the presence of Christ. And I think that's what it sounded like you were saying with your daughter, that even in the midst of hard things, whether there's presence of Christ, there's a peace there that it's not you're happy, but you're okay. Yeah. And there really is a hope. And I hope that's what our video conveys to people, is that whatever your situation it is, maybe it's something similar to ours where the end might be different. Maybe it's financially, you don't know how it's going to work out. Maybe there's an absentee father, and so you don't think it's even worth trying. Like there are many different challenges, and each one of them is scary in its own way. And legitimate. And legit in its own way. We don't have the corner market on that. But I think that's what I wanted people to know, is that there is hope. That if you choose life, you get the opportunity to see God prove himself in amazing and miraculous ways. And whether that's you choose to keep a child, put a child up for adoption, whatever that choice ends up looking like for you, whatever honoring life looks like for you, that God will be with you in that. And man, when you give him the opportunity to prove himself, he never disappoints. Never disappoints. And he is so much more creative than we are. Yeah. And thinking about, like, because we kind of have an idea of what we think that's going to look like, and then he kind of blows it, out of the water, and it turns it on its head, and you're just like, this isn't what I thought. But it's so good.
Yeah, and he gets the glory, and it makes me think of Ephesians 2:10.
Yeah.
You know that we are God's handiwork, created for good works that God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. That includes that child. You know, that child is someone made by God's hand for good works.
Yeah.
And it's not our place to decide when those good works should end or if they should even exist. It's for us to leave in God's hands and for Him to do. And it's not easy. And I went through, a good bit of depression after we lost our first daughter. It's not easy, but it is glorious.
It is, and it allows for His strength to be demonstrated in us, that covering that I talked about at the beginning, to show we know when people look at people, especially like us, who've made hard choices, they're like, oh, you're so strong and everything, and you just really are like, if you only saw like how ugly it is when you in that scene, and when we go home and the tears and the cries and the prayers and stuff like that. I mean, there were times where we would pray, I don't even know if it was audible, the things that we would pray, but to see the Lord follow through with that and show over and over again His goodness in it, it's an exciting thing to show and to display. And I hope that our story will encourage more people to give Him a chance to show that.
I hope so too. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story and your family story. It's really good.